Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3 is finally here, nearly a decade after Volume 1, 6 years after Volume 2, 4 years after the events of Infinity War and Endgame. It even survived Gunn's firing and rehiring while dealing with production delays that resulted from schedule conflicts with the Suicide Squad by DC, who'd hired Gunn during his Marvel hiatus, only to eventually give him the proverbial keys to their kingdom, universe. And Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3 kind of reflects its gnarled production history, because for me, this is the weakest installment in a trilogy that I really do love. Volume 1 is a great the band gets together story, despite it having the same tired tropes that it seemed like all those Marvel movies did at the time. It introduces its characters, establishes the dynamic between them, and has some great moments where they shine individually and then eventually as a team. Volume 2 told a bigger story with a larger threat to the galaxy, and it continued to flesh out the Guardians while raising the stakes on their adventures. Each of the Guardians gets enough attention from the story's plot, and their individual arcs come together nicely in the third act, where we experience the loss of a fan favorite character. And Volume 3 is a focused, entertaining story that is much more serious in tone than the first two. It heavily zeroes in on Rocket Raccoon, his origins, and the Guardians' struggle to save him against the scientists that created him, the High Evolutionary. Trust me, it's compelling stuff, man. And while the Guardians are all reunited again for one last adventure to save Rocket, they're not all given the same amount of character development that they had gotten from Gunn in the previous movies, where he always managed to spread the story out much more judiciously across the whole cast. The plot of Volume 3 is basically a mission to save Rocket's life with flashbacks to his origins weaved throughout it. Star-Lord and Gamora are sidelined to a subplot that's played largely for laughs and isn't given enough time to develop in a 2.5-hour long movie. Groot, Nebula, Drax, and Mantis are all back with plenty of screen time, and it's always great to see them, but they don't have a lot going on with their characters outside of accomplishing task after task after task on the mission to save Rocket.
Ooh, I have so much stuff to do today. I have to do laundry, then I have a piano lesson, then I have to make dinner. I'm so busy. Better hurry.
So Rocket's fighting for his life while dealing with his past, where he comes from, all the trauma surrounding it. Quill and Gamora are at least having this interpersonal conflict over control versus free will that parallels the movie's villain and his whole shtick. Hell, you can even lump Adam Warlock into that whole theme. Oh, by the way, Adam Warlock's in this movie. But the other core four Guardians, they're just going from A to B to get C, only to find out they have to go to D because really C is located inside E's head, which means they have to break into F to retrieve C, all while D is exploding.
Huh?
You get the point. It's very task-oriented. And that's not a bad thing, really. Volume 3 is an exciting movie, but it did this interesting reshuffling of the deck with the characters. Rocket gets a ton of character development in Volume 3, and it's really well done, while the previous protagonist, Quill, barely gets a side story, and Gamora is reset to an almost unrecognizable dick. Their words, not mine.
Total dick!
And the other four Guardians are just along for the ride, but hey, it beats getting left behind and only used for scene transitions like these two did. Guardians 3 is a seemingly high-stakes story that elevates Rocket with his tragic origin story, but at the cost of developing any of the other Guardians much further, which leaves some things feeling unresolved in the end. I don't know, man. A lot of the conclusions for the Guardians, at least as they'll stand under Gunn's watch, just feel tacked on, and I wouldn't be surprised if Marvel told him that he couldn't take any of the characters out of play. I mean, you never know.
Moving forward, it's really hard, and without James, I don't know how that would work, and I'm open to it, and but man, it would I don't know.
I want the Guardians to continue.
But whatever the reason is, the grand conclusion to this epic trilogy ends up having this air of cowardice to it, like Gunn couldn't quite pull the trigger to deliver that big dramatic moment here. You've got Groot's sacrifice in Volume 1, Yondu's in Volume 2, but in Volume 3, he bucks that trend entirely.
Why?
As a big fan of these characters, though, I was satisfied enough with where they all ended up. Drax and Nebula raising space hamster orphans, great. Rocket leading the new Guardians with Groot still beside him, fine. Gamora doing her own thing with the Ravagers, why not? Quill reconnecting with his grandpa on Earth, nice. Mantis leaving to find herself or whatever, Okay, sure. But by failing to deliver a single meaningful death and instead electing to do a bunch of fake-out deaths, like a lot of fake-outs, it ended up cheapening the tension that the movie builds in the previous acts. The stakes felt high at first. Rocket's life's hanging on by a thread. Their first heist goes terribly wrong. Drax gets shot point blank twice, which is no big deal for him, I guess, and an entire planet is blown up. But none of that is given a moment to sink in.
Why?
I mean, we get one scene that really allows us to soak in the emotional gravitas of the situation when Quill is trying to revive Rocket. Outside of that, all the emotional legwork in this movie is done with flashbacks to Rocket and his cute CGI animal buddies. And all that's great, but this was definitely the roughest outing for me in regards to Gunn's tendency for undercutting serious moments with his quirky humor. The dark, somber tones in this movie for everything involving Rocket, paired with the bright, often goofy scenes for everything involving the rest of the Guardians, is an interesting dichotomy that is downright jarring at times. And whether you love it or hate it, Volume 3 is full of those same quippy character moments and trippy aesthetic sensibilities that James Gunn's work is famous for. The living space station is genuinely provocative, even if the heist scene that takes place there was probably drawn out just a little too long.
Wrap it up.
And we might not have gotten as many great character moments for all of the Guardians in Volume 3 the way that we did in 1 and 2. The Guardians' final fight together in that hallway demonstrates just how far James Gunn's come as a director. I mean, he managed to give each of the Guardians their badass curtain call moment while pacing them through a chaotic fight scene that for once in a Marvel movie doesn't cause inherent motion sickness. There's a lot this movie does well that puts it leagues above the rest of the MCU, and if you've enjoyed the rest of the Guardians movies so far, you're definitely going to like Volume 3, or at the very least you'll accept it. So, I mean, yeah, visually it's stunning. I mean, you can see where a lot of that $250 million budget went. But the story that occupies those beautiful scenes is laden with blatantly bad plot points, something that the first two movies are just not plagued with. Like, for example, take the start of the movie when Rocket gets attacked by Adam Warlock and is gravely injured, which starts off the whole movie's plot, trying to steal a code from the people who made Rocket so that they can save his life because they're unable to medically intervene without it. But my question is, has Rocket never ever been seriously injured? Why is this just becoming a known thing with him? Is it because Warlock attacked him? Maybe just because he's getting old? Perhaps the High Evolutionary did something to him before the attack?
What are the rules? You know what I mean?
And towards the end, we get a really bad one where Quill tries to jump into space to escape an exploding ship, but for some reason, he doesn't have his signature rocket boots and space helmet. Why? Totally unexplained. Seriously, if anybody out there actually knows and can tell me where his space helmet and rocket boots are in Volume 3, I would really like to know. I have $100 for you if you can tell me where that space helmet and those rocket boots are. Despite those frustrating little plot holes throughout Volume 3's story, it actually kind of reminded me of The Empire Strikes Back, mixed with the opening of Return of the Jedi, where they have to rescue Han. Kind of like Empire, Volume 3 is simple and focused, for the most part. Adam comes for Rocket, damages him, the Guardians can't fix him, set out to steal what they need to fix him from the scientists who made Rocket, break into their base only to discover that what they need is elsewhere, head over to that other location, steal what they need to fix Rocket, and then go after the High Evolutionary while also rescuing his animal experiments. And in between, we have a lot of flashbacks explaining Rocket's past. Too many, maybe. Three would have probably done the trick. And so that focused, small-scale plot gets bogged down into scenes that go on for much too long at the living space station and again on Counter-Earth. They're both freaky visual set pieces and funny concepts, but they go on and on and on.
Wrap it up.
So within this tight story, you have these scenes that just end up lingering.
Lingerer, man.
Yeah, totally.
Linger.
And stuff like that should be fine for a 2.5 hour long movie, right? But this one still manages to leave most of the principal cast in the lurch. Besides Rocket's origin and the adventure to save his life, the only other storyline that we get is Quill pining over Gamora, which did get a little better in the third act, with Gamora and Quill working together for a lot of it, reestablishing, or I guess initiating, their natural chemistry again. And there's even a little bit of resolution between them. Both characters are left in good places individually at the end of the movie. Quill accepting that the Gamora he loved is gone and that this Gamora is a different person. In fact, I give full credit to Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3. Although it demoted Quill to a supporting character after he led the first two movies, Star-Lord is written with dignity. He's the same decision-making, smart-ass leader he's always been for the Guardians. But who the hell is Grandpa and why is he so important? I don't mind Quill's story leaving off with him reconnecting with his Earth family, but that was really out of left field, even if it did result in the best post-credit scene since Ant-Man and the Wasp. Gamora going off with the Ravagers, though, that works for me, because this movie is largely about the importance of friendship and having the freedom to choose your own path and your own family. Gamora is a new Gamora, like a completely different Gamora than even Volume 1's Gamora. So she chooses a different path and a different family. Acceptable. But then the rest of the Guardians just split up and that's the end. Suddenly, like, hey, we're all just breaking up now. And it's like, what? Did you all get sick of each other or something? There's like a little bit of resentment between Mantis and Nebula, but that's about it. So they break up their chosen family and choose new lives. Okay. But you can thank God, because Volume 3 is a nice self-contained story that literally doesn't involve any other shit from the MCU outside of one comment from Star-Lord about the Infinity Saga, Gamora's death, and her subsequent resurrection, which to be honest kind of felt like a personal statement from James Gunn regarding creative decisions that were made with his characters in those movies. And there is no way that The Dog Days Are Over by Florence and the Machine playing at the end of this movie is not a personal statement about him moving on to DC to go be his own boss. I mean, come on, man.
I learned a lot of, from Kevin Feige about how you just, you don't give up on a movie. You just keep pushing it, no matter what. Like, you can't give up on something, even if it's not the greatest movie. You got to make it better.
Ooh, and while we're on the subject of music, this is the worst soundtrack in the trilogy by far, which isn't a major diss. I admit I have to watch them all again in order to really understand why this one seems so much worse compared to the other two for me. But after only one viewing, I can say that the musical selections themselves seemed way less focused, going all over the place. I mean, this movie has a few songs that Gunn chose this time around that do not match up with their corresponding scenes nearly as well as he seems to have always managed to do in the previous Guardians movies. But honestly, I blame part of that on the fact that Chris Pratt apparently has a clause in his contract that states No Sleep Till Brooklyn needs to be played in every single one of his 2023 movies. Why? Unexplainable. But it just sucks that it's used in the coolest scene of the movie, the hallway fight scene, which everybody loved, especially me, because Drax is using his two knives and Gamora her big ass sword. What this movie lacked, though, was weapon diversity. Despite the fact that one of the coolest things about the Guardians is that they all bring different talents and deadly skills to the table. But Volume 3 has them all mostly using blaster guns, and the fact that they're all wearing the same outfit for most of the movie doesn't exactly help either. Now, on the other hand, Gunn has nailed his villain in Volume 3 with the High Evolutionary. His smaller scope and focus as a cold corporate leader with a sadistic, scientific approach to everything was genuinely a fresh change from the average Marvel villain. He was threatening and worthy of being taken seriously as a threat without feeling like he was so powerful that the galaxy was at stake. For once. Instead, their friend's life is at stake, and it adds a whole level of heart to the story that contributes to High Evolutionary being an easy bad guy for the audience to hate, especially with the abundance of animal cruelty.
I'm as mad as hell, and I'm not gonna take this anymore!
And then you have Adam Warlock, who at the very least balances out the High Evolutionary's threatening tone by being this goofy, dumb bad guy in the movie. Man, he gets clowned in this thing. I mean, really, what even is his storyline? They set him up previously in this huge way, and I guess that out of obligation, they felt like they had to deliver, but Adam Warlock just doesn't feel like he really belongs here. And you can tell that the plot doesn't really know what to do with him either. Past the opening scene where he sets everything in motion by severely injuring Rocket before getting stabbed and incapacitated by Nebula. And I'm typically not a fan of killing off such a highly anticipated character so quickly, but they probably should have used that opportunity to write him out of the story, because the rest of the time he's just used for gags, occasionally popping in at random throughout the story without ever really having much relevancy to it.
I did feel pressure to put him in. I wrote, a lot of the stuff was written for Volume 2. Originally, Adam Warlock was in Volume 2.
He's honestly even given a pretty big moment when his mom, the High Priestess, is killed in the destruction at Counter-Earth. But does it come off as a big deal for him in any way? No. So why the hell should I care either? Overall, though, I thought Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3 was fine. Pretty good, actually, and although I laid into it a little bit here, the only thing that I really hated about it was the use of No Sleep Till Brooklyn in that hallway fight scene.
You really blew it!
It should have been Badlands by Bruce Springsteen playing in that scene, goddammit. James Gunn, you coward! And honestly, in a lot of ways, Volume 3 comes across like a brilliant student who's turning in their last assignment for their old school. It's not their best work, but it's passable, and they're just trying to move on to the brand new thing.
Wrap it up.
At the end of the day, though, it's a solid conclusion to the Guardians of the Galaxy trilogy under Gunn that adds to the series without taking anything away. And while it may not be the strongest volume in this series, it still managed to do the heavy lifting that's required to close out this multi-movie story. And for that, I can definitely recommend Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3. But if Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3 is supposed to be the big kickoff for Phase 5 of the MCU, and in reality it's the final chapter for most of these characters, then Phase 5 is about to be known as Phase Dive.